In this video, I'm going to show you how to create 5 types of scrape collage paper, which is so fun and easy to make. Hello, my name is Catherine Rains. I'm a mixed media collage artist, and welcome to Tune In Tuesday, where I share art demos to expand your mixed media toolbox. If you see value in my art demos, I would deeply appreciate a thumbs up, and if you would subscribe to my channel below. Links for all the supplies to make these papers are down below under the word more. And you might also want to check out my free 5-day online workshop, Collage Kickstart, where I teach you how to make all the collage papers taught during Tune In Tuesday to make fabulous collages the very first try. So let's get into creating scrape collage papers. Let's start with what supplies you need to make these yummy papers. First, you want some kind of tape. Now, this isn't something you don't really have to have, but taping your paper down to me was a little easier because you want to keep the paper very steady as you're actually doing the scraping. So I've got repositionable artist tape. You can also just use blue painter's tape just to secure the paper. I also have acrylic paint. Now this is Nova acrylic paint. This is my preferred brand, but you can use any paint at all. A more liquidy, soft body I find works better, but you could also use a hard body. And what I've done is I actually poured that Nova paint into these condiment bottles, which is how I usually store my paint, just because I can easily just pour it out instead of having to get a palette knife and get it onto a palette paper. For this particular paper, having it in these condiment bottles is particularly convenient because this is the kind of paper that really lends itself to just pouring the paint out, and you'll see as I go along. So my color palette is basically these two colors, and I use phthalo blue-green shade, Hansa yellow light, in addition to also Quin magenta, although I'm not using that in this demo. So I use 3 primaries for all of my collage papers, and I just mix them in different amounts to get different colors. I also add black and white, and then I've also taken more of these little bottles, and this is a mixture of these two plus a little white. So you'll see me putting down other colors that I've just pre-mixed just to make this super simple to do. And then you also want some scrapers. So I just pulled out anything that might create texture. This right here, a little comb, ended up being my favorite of all the scrapers, just a really simple tool. I also have some scrapers from Catalyst, which I love, with different kinds of edges, different kind of combs. This is a bathroom squeegee, which is really nice. This is actually meant for painting, like, spreading paint around, which I thought was really useful. A palette knife, and then you want paper. Now, I tried this on 2 different kinds of paper. You do want a heavier weight paper. So I first tried it on sketch paper, which was 75 pound. That worked. However, the paper curled a little bit as it was drying, but that's not a problem because when you actually glue your dried papers down, they'll glue flat. The paper I used most for this technique was a watercolor paper, 140 pound, and I liked that better because it laid flatter. But again, the fact that the watercolor paper also curled, it's just a little easier to work with when I'm actually going through the process of using it for a collage. A couple supplies I didn't mention was a piece of palette paper so you can lay out your paints, which I am doing right here, just squirting them from my little condiment bottles. And I also have taped down my sketch paper, in this case, to an MDF board. This just makes it easier so that I can move the board when I'm done with this paper and I can put another one down. So it just makes it easy for me to move the paper because we're going to have a lot of paint on these papers and you don't want to be kind of maneuvering the paper itself. You want to have it steady in some way. And I knew I wanted to make a lot of them, so I pulled out a whole bunch of my old MDF boards that I make a lot of paper on. I'm just randomly putting down different colors. Now they all go together, luckily, because they all came from the same 2 base colors. They're 2 primaries, phthalo blue, green shade, and Hansa yellow light. Of course, this one doesn't want to come out of the bottle right now, but I'm kind of layering it on fairly thick. And I think I'm going to find out when I start scraping this that it's not enough paint. So I kind of learn as I go along. But I have it on my palette paper, and now I have a large scraper, and I'm just going to pull it onto the very top of my sketch paper. And then I need to decide what kind of scraper that I want to pull through this. So all my scrapers are off to the side. I've got a bunch more sitting off camera as well to choose from. So let's try this comb first. So you just push the comb really heavy against the paint. And I could just go straight, but I think this weaving motion makes a very interesting pattern. And right away, I realize I don't have enough paint. I lose the paint halfway through. So for the next time, I'm going to put more paint down. But the nice thing about scrape painting is that you can scrape through it a number of different times, because I could stop right here, and I think that's a beautiful, beautiful design. So I decide I'm going to lay down more paint and go from the opposite direction and see what happens. So again, I've got my paint on the palette paper. I'm just going to scrape it onto my sketch paper and use the comb again, just go in the opposite direction. Let's see what I get. I absolutely adore this pattern. Just so happens I don't have enough paint to get paint on all the sides, but that's okay because this is a collage paper. So it's not going to be used more than likely in its entirety. I'm going to tear a piece off of it depending on what my collage needs. And this is my first one, so I'm experimenting as I go and learning as I go. Now I'm noticing there's a lot of ripple in this paper. This is sketch paper. It's a lighter weight paper. It's 75 pounds. It's still pretty heavy, but it doesn't hold up as well as a watercolor paper. So this paper actually dried overnight. I'm just going to pull off the tape here to see what I have, to show us both what we have. Now, this paper is a tiny bit rippled because this is a 75-pound sketch pad as opposed to a watercolor paper, but when it gets glued down to a collage, it'll be perfectly flat. So I've got my second MDF board down and another piece of sketch paper, and I'm just going to put a little bit of tape on the edges. And again, the reason I'm taping it down is just to keep the paper still as I scrape through it. Because if that paper starts moving around when I'm pushing, one of these mark makers against it, it will still make an interesting design, but I really want to have a little more control, which is why I'm taping it down. Now, again, I need to decide what color I want to put down. And this is really fun to do because you can just kind of play with different combinations and kind of play the what if, suppose, how about game, and like what colors would look interesting scraped together, basically. I've learned my lesson from the last time, and I'm putting a lot more paint down, adding a little gold highlights, which I think might be interesting. I'll scrape that onto the watercolor paper. Now the question is what to scrape through it. So I'm going to use this little catalyst wedge with a little bit of pattern to it, and I'm already completely in love. The only hard part about doing this is knowing when to stop, because I could have stopped with just one pull through here. Although I do end up liking it a lot, but the more you pull through, the more the colors blend together. And as you can see right there, you don't have this distinct color separation. And I really want that because I think it looks more interesting. And like the first one, this one took overnight to dry. In fact, all of these took quite a bit of time to dry because it's really thick paint. But all of that texture remained on the piece. Love it. Okay. Time to put some more paint down. And I keep thinking, what color do I want to emphasize? And the moment I'm thinking green or this kind of apple green and yellow would be pretty cool. And maybe some teal on top of that. The nice thing is there's really no rules for this. It's just, what sounds like fun to try, which is exactly what I'm doing here. Just adding paint on top of each other, see what I'm going to get. And I don't know. You don't know until you actually scrape something through it. Most of these papers I end up loving, but a few of them are like, I don't know. Now, one thing you can do to save your paint so you're not using as much is scrape it off, whatever you're scraping this onto, because you end up getting quite a bit of extra paint, but I end up using every single bit of the paint. So nothing goes to waste here. I think we're going to do a comb again because a comb ended up being really one of my very favorite mark makers for this technique. Let's see if I've put down enough paint this time. Nope. Although again, I could have stopped right here because I think it's a beautiful design as it is. Just so you know, I have now switched at this point to watercolor paper. The first two were sketch paper, which were fine. They just rippled more as they were drying, but they ended up drying fairly flat. But I like the watercolor paper because it's so substantial. Just feels easier to work with. Let's try doing this from the opposite side. These are just so gorgeous. And the paper dried. Love that. And love all the texture that remained when it dried. This time, I'm just going to scrape through with that large scraper itself, just barely pulling it through. And I love that. A totally different look from the comb look. And I've got some extra paint there, so I'm going to preserve that and use it for another pull. That will be the next one I do. And the finished collage paper. This one dried really fast compared to the other ones because I actually scraped all that paint off of it, whereas the other ones I left the texture on with the scraping. I love doing this scrape down technique so much. I wanted to try it one more time. Very different look. Not as much gold in this one, but love this one as well. And the second paper in this technique dried. This almost reminds me of a Van Gogh painting, the way all of the colors kind of smeared together. And I love those pops of gold. Now I want to use up a lot of that extra paint. So I'm just taking it from the scraper from the last pull as well as the palette paper and just laying it down onto the watercolor paper. I'm going to try something pretty simple this time. Add a little bit of gold to it for a little bit of pop. Then I'm going to take my palette knife and use that as the scraper. Now this might have been more interesting if I had had more colors up, scraping through, but I actually like this too, just because sometimes you need papers that don't have as much going on, as much pattern. And the finished collage paper. Again, this paper is so simple, and I like it that way because it'll be really nice to put it next to something with a lot of patterns in it. A lot of my papers have much more going on, so this will be nice to kind of quiet a piece down. Now for something very different, I'm going to just pour paint right onto the paper in different patterns. Now, by the way, what I'm showing you, I actually learned by watching several artists on Instagram do different kinds of pulls like this. So I'm going to give you links under the word more under this video that will show you other artists that are doing this that I actually literally got it from. So you'll get some other ideas about color combinations and how they do it. But this particular technique was exactly what another artist did, and I just thought, wow, I gotta try this one. Now, this is a bathroom squeegee, and I'm just gonna pull the colors through. Look at that. And the dried collage paper. So cool that I've got to try it one more time. And what I've learned from the first one is I need more paint. So I'm laying it on much thicker. Having these condiment bottles already filled with colors makes this much easier. But another way of doing this is just getting some craft paint, because craft paint tends to be in little bottles that are very pourable already. So it's an inexpensive and easy way of doing this. But in particular, I want all of my papers to go together. Okay, I'm going to squeegee this through, see what we get. You never know, and I like this a lot as soon as I see it. I don't want to waste any paint, so all the extra paint I am putting back on the squeegee, and I'm making a very bold move here and taking that paint and pulling it through. Now, by the way, I did like it, and now I don't like it. So just so you know, not all of my papers end up being something I love. This one's just, They don't all have to be good though. This will probably be a layer paper for later on. With this one, I'm going to try something a little different. Again, I'm going to pour the paint right on, but I'm going to do a kind of a swirling motion and see if I can get a little bit of variation in the patterns of the paper I'm getting. This was actually something I saw an artist on Instagram do, and I thought it was super cool and so simple to do. Now this time I'm just going to use a trowel, only because it was clean. I could have used the bathroom squeegee too, but I didn't want to take the time to wash it off. And I love that. So interesting. And the final dried collage paper. Now I've got a lot of extra paint from that last pull through. I'm going to pour it onto the edge of the paper and see what I can do with it. Let's try a different kind of catalyst wedge with a little bit different. Oh, don't like that one. Not giving me an interesting enough variation. Now this paint is very, very thick. So I'm getting these luscious thick lines, but it's not spreading all that well. And it's partially to do with the catalyst wedge itself. It's not pulling it through the same way if I had a smaller toothed one, which I used in the beginning. So I need more paint to make this work, and definitely more variation in color, because that paint on the bottom of the sheet there was all the leftover paint, which all kind of blended together. I wasn't getting a lot of variation. I'm determined to get some kind of design here. So I'll just keep pulling it through and adding paint until I get something I like. Although I could probably stop right here. But why do that when I can keep scraping and playing? I knew if I kept adding and scraping, I would get something I liked. And I do like this quite a bit. Texture is just delicious. And this one is so cool because it maintained all of that rich texture. I even have some little air bubbles right there, which I think look intentional, although they weren't. Now, through all these experiments, I have learned the comb is the favorite of all of the mark makers here. So I want to make more of these. As I'm doing this, I get so excited because the way the colors are staying separated like that, but giving me kind of a herringbone pattern. Is that what that is? It's just so gorgeous to me. It's fun to see what you get because it's not all that predictable. Oh my goodness, I absolutely love this. And the dried collage paper retained all of that beautiful texture. For my last one, I decided I really want a lighter value if I can. So I'm going to add a lot of white to this one and see if I can get the colors just to come out lighter, because everything is like kind of a medium and a dark color that I've already created so far. And use my favorite implement, the comb. And I am so thrilled with what's coming out there. And again, I could keep it just the way it is. I don't need to do a second pull, but I really want more of that page filled up. But you risk doing that because now I could get these colors to kind of blend together, whereas they're really defined right now with the comb, which I think is really very beautiful. Oh my gosh, so gorgeous. And the final paper is my favorite of all. I think when I do this in the future, which I will be doing, I will add a lot more white to my palette because I love that streak of white in the middle. It really adds a beautiful contrast to the darker colors. And I have my finished collection. You know, seeing them all together makes me go, oh my gosh, to me, these are so yummy. I mean, like I want to eat them yummy, and they're so useful in the kind of collages that I like to make. Now, this collection of papers is the fourth in a series of 5 different types of papers. So if you've been following me for a while, you know that I create 5 different types of papers and then turn them into a mini collage series. So this is number 4 out of 5. I'll make at least one more type of paper, if not 2, and then take those 5 or 6 different types of papers, pull them together into a mini series. So that's a wrap for this week. Thanks for coming with me, and I hope you have an absolute blast creating your own scrape collage papers. To learn how to make many more types of collage papers, check out the links that are about to appear right here, and be sure to join my free 5-day online class, Collage Kickstart. The link to sign up is under the word MORE below. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I would be deeply grateful if you would. And I'll see you back here next week for Tune In Tuesday.